Hello! Thank you guys so much for coming to this video today. It's another Cardano Aura. You guys seem to have been loving them lately. So if you guys have any guests or anything that you want to come on, feel free to comment down below. But the Cardano Aura is my podcast. It's Cardano's use and utility podcast. It's about anyone that brings value to the Cardano blockchain. I essentially have them on. We get all the knowledge we can out of them because they're full of great insights. And just doing these podcasts, I've learned so much. Like, I am honestly much higher really on my learning pedestal than I was before I started making this. So I applaud everyone that's come on, but I hope you guys enjoy these too. So, but yeah, if you guys want to support this channel, all you have to do is click the like button, comment down below, click notifications, and then click all. So what's going on in this podcast today? So today it's Sebastien. I love Sebastien. He was actually the first person to ever come on this podcast, and he's full of knowledge. We go over stable coins. We go over DeFi on Cardano. We go over a lot of Ergo stuff they're doing over there that they're going to port over to Cardano. We go over like kind of small pools, the K parameter, the future decentralization of Cardano, ways to fix current problems. It's a great podcast. So if you guys do enjoy it, like I said, please comment that down below. Because I am trying to figure out the direction of this, and your comments do have an impact on that. Another way you can support me is by delegating to Bloom. Bloom is my passion. It's my stake pool. We were actually the 8th ever block on Cardano, so we've been here from the beginning, and we're going to be here till year end because Cardano will live on forever, and so will Bloom. So if you guys want to support my channel and also support the mission that is Bloom, feel free to delegate. We pay some great returns. So I actually do have a sponsor of this video. I've gotten some sponsors on the podcast lately, and it makes sense because I didn't go for funding, so just these quick little sponsors really do help out. So the sponsor of this video today is Skillshare, and Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people, explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. So I actually have, because when I do the sponsors, they let me try it out because I wanted to make sure that I'm advertising something that I like. And what I've actually been using is the video, right? And the video and photos, because if you guys notice, my videos improved, well, that's directly linked to Skillshare. I've been learning a lot more just using specifically the videography stuff, but they have a lot on there. They have entrepreneurship stuff, freelance stuff, Photoshop. They just have really any course you can think of when it comes to, personal growth and entrepreneurship. They have it, so. And this is Skillshare believes a strong community is essential to personal growth. Tap into support of fellow creatives who provide encouragement, communication, and inspiration. And that's why I like doing the sponsor for Skillshare, because the personal growth, even though people don't really talk about it, I think is at the core of Cardano. I really watch a lot of people, not financially, but mentally grow with Cardano as they meet the other people in the ecosystem. And so Skillshare does kind of meet our values. So if you guys want to better yourself, then make sure you guys do Skillshare. And the first 1,000 people, specifically my subscribers, to click the link in the description will get a free trial of the premium membership so you can explore your creativity. And another thing I must mention is that it's curated specifically for learning, meaning that there's no ads. They're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. And it's just $10 a month with no annual subscription. So let's get into this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited. I'm geeked. I'm hype. Hello. Thank you guys so much for coming to this podcast today. This is the Cardano Aura. We bring the people in the Cardano ecosystem that bring value to Cardano. And today we have Sebastien with us. He's the co-VP of engineering over at Emurgo. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing good. Calling in from Japan. This is where I live. I live in Tokyo. And currently I work for Emurgo, as you said, as the co-VP of engineering and Cardano project manager. So I work with our team of engineers, working on products such as the Yoroi wallet. And we've been working on some more smart contract related functionality recently, like our stablecoin released on Ergo and this kind of product.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to go into the stablecoin that you guys have been working on earlier. So a lot of new people have been watching my channel, and I can tell just by the comments I get and the emails I get. So let's start off very basic, and I'm sorry if you guys already know this information, but we're going to go deeper in a minute. So what is the Yoroi wallet? A lot of people have maybe never heard of the Yoroi wallet or used Daedalus, and what is the differences? And another thing is a lot of people think that it's only a mobile app. I get that all the time. Oh, it's on desktop too. So what is the Yoroi wallet?
Yeah, so Yoroi is a light wallet for Cardano. What that means is that you can use it without syncing the whole blockchain. So obviously, it's great for people to sync the whole blockchain so they can verify the whole history of the blockchain themselves. But not everybody can do that. Not everybody has a strong computer, especially on mobile devices where you may not even have the storage capacity for this. We need to make this accessible for everybody. So the goal of Yoroi is let's make a wallet that's accessible to as many people as possible. So there's kind of two parts of that. One of them is we want an easy, light experience on the desktop or on your laptop. And that's where the Yoroi extension comes in. So it's a browser extension. You download it on your browser on Chrome, Firefox, Brave, Edge, any browser you want. And you can easily, from your browser, access Yoroi and load up your wallet basically instantaneously because it doesn't have to sync the blockchain. Now, obviously, another part of that is the mobile application. So we have Yoroi available on both Android and iOS. So you can, have Yoroi on your computer and then take it on the go wherever you want to go. The thing is that we're kind of the biggest light wallet for Cardano, which means that we have about 50-50 split between mobile users and desktop users. And we have about over 100,000 users on all platforms, so quite a lot of people. And there's another wallet for Cardano that's called dApps that some people are familiar with, which is the kind of full node wallet for Cardano. And so dApps requires you to sync the full blockchain. And so if you're kind of the person who wants to verify the whole transaction history, that might be good for you. But for everybody else, Yoroi is kind of the answer.
Awesome. Yeah, and another thing that people don't know is that they can actually recover, if they're using the 24-word in dApps, they can actually recover that in Yoroi. So if you want a light version, maybe on a different computer, or maybe on your laptop, or even on mobile, you can actually just recover the same 24-word into Yoroi. A lot of people, when they say, oh, I want to move over to Yoroi, I'm having trouble with dApps, do I have to make a whole new wallet and restake to a pool? No, when you recover your wallet into Yoroi, it's essentially just viewing those addresses on the blockchain. So it'll stay staked, so that's pretty cool. You guys have added a lot of new features lately. We have a voting tab and the buy and sell tab. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so in Yoroi, we always have kind of two things going on in parallel. One of them is required functionality, and the other one is quality of life functionality. So obviously the required functionality is stuff like supporting the Shelley hard fork, supporting the Mary hard fork, supporting the treasury system. These are all features that we absolutely must have in Yoroi. Otherwise, there's no point using us as a wallet. Yeah. And so that takes up a lot of my time personally. And so a lot of the stuff that I do at Emurgo is I read through all the documents by HK and the code by HK and the specifications and try and figure out what we need to do, what are our core priorities, and then work with our team to implement those. But we also want to have more than just supporting Cardano. We also want to have a great user experience. And so that means we also have to spend time, figuring out how do we show all the functionality of the Cardano blockchain, which it's a lot of functionality, while still trying to keep a simple user experience, and we try and listen to user feedback on Twitter, on Telegram, and so on, and implement features they want, like the buy sell button. And so we try and manage both these priorities, and it's kind of hard because, as you know, the core development of the blockchain is done by AgeUSD, which is the company that does the primary development of the Cardano blockchain right now. And so for stuff like the Mary hard fork that happened last week now, they're the ones who kind of organize the core protocol change itself. And then we at Emurgo, we developed the SDK for mobile, we developed the SDK for browsers, and we implement them into Yoroi and some of our tooling we provide. And so it means it's hard to know how much time we have for this kind of quality of life upgrade because how much time these hard forks take from our schedule is not entirely up to us. But I think we've hit a kind of good balance. Obviously, people always want more features. People are never, fully satisfied. But I think people see that, we've not only kept Yoroi up to date, but every feature that people ask, we get to that eventually, and people tend to kind of get everything they ask.
Well, it seems like you guys have gotten faster, built up a bit of more momentum because, we had the voting registration in there very quick at the same time as the Mary hard fork, or whereas when you look back at Shelley, it was a couple weeks later, and it's because you had to wait on IOG to release that. But even though you had to do that this time, we still had the voting ready to go, for Fund 3, and then also the Merry Hard Fork and the tokens ready to go. So I applaud you for that.
Yeah, and there's some reason for that. So the thing is, as I mentioned, Emurgo is the one that writes the SDK for mobile and for browsers for Cardano. And this SDK is not just used by Yoroi, but it's also used by exchanges and other wallets and so on. And when the Shelley hard fork came around, we had to basically write this SDK from scratch. We had some previous stuff we were using, but Shelley was so totally different that none of it was going to work anymore. We had to have a whole new system. And so to develop that system was hard, not because writing such a large project takes time, but also because Shelley was such a big upgrade that every time AgeUSD changed something, it would take a while for it to kind of go through the pipeline until we could eventually update our SDK. Mm-hmm. And so there's kind of a big time delay. And as you may remember, in the Shelley hard fork, things were still changing kind of, even a month before the hard fork, these kind of slight tweaks here and there.
Huge changes.
And so, yeah. And so that was kind of tough to deal with. But because now we've entered Shelley, the part of the goal of Shelley was to, relaunch with a whole new code base, as you may remember. That is much easier to update, and now we have binary specifications, we have semi-formal specification, and whenever our next hard fork comes out, it's no longer a rewrite from scratch, it's just an updated specification. And so the reason Merry was much easier to deal with is because this was much easier for us to grasp and much easier for us to set in stone, because when AgeUSD said, okay, we have the Merry hard fork, this is what we're planning to do. It's just, okay, here's the specification, here's the change in specification. We already have our library. Our library is automatically generated from the specification. We just crank the wheel, it regenerates the code, and then we proceed with the integration. And it's just a much smoother experience because of that. And, even the hard fork itself, like Shelley was kind of a mess. But now that we have the hard fork combinator and it's running properly, the nodes just upgrade by themselves, and we don't have to kind of deal with like in the Shelley hard fork, stuff, not quite being as smooth as we would have liked. But so now that we have the proper engineering, both from the Emurgo side and the AgeUSD side. The Allegro hard fork, people might not even know there was an Allegro hard fork. Like, that's how smooth it was. Mm-hmm. And then Merry, from an engineering perspective, I think most people didn't notice, but I think only people noticed because of the multi-asset feature, which is something that a lot of people wanted to use. And so there's a lot of, community appetite for this feature. But there's very few posts on social media about anything going down or any problems, because, the code and the whole process for upgrading is so much cleaner now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Shelley, and that's just so funny because Shelley was a mess. I mean, from the stateful operator side, we had probably, I want to say 6 to 8 test nets in the span of a month leading up to Shelley, and there was new features each time. And it was just like, as soon as we'd get our nodes up and synced, we'd start trying stuff out, and they'd be like, there's another one. And we're just like, and it was before they were really...
If some of the listeners have been in this space for a while, you might remember, back in like 2018, AgeUSD put out some whiteboard videos about the design they want for Shelley, and like, oh, we'll have this in place and allow us to test and generate from the specification and have stuff upgrade automatically. And, after the Shelley hard fork, that's when we finally have this in place. And so now we finally have, kind of a smooth experience to upgrade for Merry and so on. And so if you've seen those videos, now you can be like, oh, like, they're right. It really did get better.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, especially in 2018, looking at some of that, like, because I remember even hearing a little bit about an ERC20 converter back then, and I was just like it just seemed like a dream, but it's all coming together now. It's pretty cool. But I wanted to talk about Emurgo. So we have the 3 pillars of Cardano. We have IOG, who works on the node software, as you mentioned earlier, and then we have Emurgo, which is who you work for, and then we also have the Cardano Foundation. So what's Emurgo's part in this for people that are new?
Yeah. So when we created Cardano, we wanted to have 3 entities, right, as you mentioned. And Emurgo's role was to kind of be the one that built on top of the core protocol. And so we've tried to do the best we can without smart contracts. Obviously, there's limited amount of stuff that you can do without them. And the stuff that we could do was stuff like Yoroi, which is now one of the top used wallets for Cardano. We want to have a smooth user experience to onboard everybody, and we want to prepare for smart contracts to have a platform for people to kind of onboard onto. We've done stuff like SDKs that, as I mentioned, we use and other companies use. And so we try and build this kind of ecosystem on top of the core protocol. But as smart contracts are coming closer in Cardano through the Alonzo hard fork that's coming up later this year, we're getting more into core smart contract development and getting into DeFi and all these kinds of opportunities that exist in the blockchain space. And part of the way we're doing that is through a different blockchain called Ergo. And this is a blockchain where they have smart contracts that work similar to Cardano. And so we're able to kind of test out some ideas we have, some designs we have on this Ergo blockchain, get them released to people on there, see what their feedback is, and take that experience that we learn and release the same products on Cardano once the smart contracts are available. And so, as I mentioned, we have a stable coin. We also have an Oracle system on Ergo as well. And right now we're working on a dApp connector for Yoroi. So what is a dApp connector? It means that if you go to a website that has some smart contract functionality, you'll be able to get a pop-up in your browser saying like, hey, do you want to connect to this website? And it'll automatically connect your wallet, and you'll be able to send transactions powered by the dApp and so on.
Yeah, so
And
similar to
we're
like
currently,
MetaMask if you've used
yeah,
dApps
exactly.
on Ethereum before.
Yeah. And so we're currently working on a dApp connector for Ergo, and we hope to finish the beta version next week. And so we'll have an internal release to developers to see, how easy is this to integrate? Do they find any issues in the user experience and so on? And so after we do the kind of initial developer release, and if we get good feedback, then we'll release this to the public on the Ergo blockchain. Now, because Cardano works similarly, it means that once we get, Cardano smart contracts and that kind of infrastructure ready, we'll have already this Ergo connector that we can just, tweak slightly to be a Cardano connector, and we can release this to the community, and then we'll have a full, dApp experience from day one with Plutus. So this is the kind of stuff that we're, working on at this current stage, and some of the stuff we're already releasing. We already have users. We already have people using SDKs and so on. And some of the stuff that we do for Cardano is more in kind of preparation stages.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know this, but Emurgo wasn't originally contracted to make Yoroi, and it's funny that it just kind of became one of my favorite. It's my favorite wallet at this point, and it's funny that you guys weren't even contracted to do that. It's just something that you did on the side, and then it's like it's leading into everything else that you guys are going to create, with the connecting the dApps together, and it's really interesting. So you're working on AgeUSD, right? Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we're trying to kind of experiment with smart contracts on the Ergo blockchain. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing we want to try kind of building out is a stable coin. And we didn't want to have a actual dollar-backed stable coin because that implies a bunch of legal problems, and also people are not as, excited about, dollar-backed stable coins. It's kind of technology-wise not so interested. It's more about, bank audits and so on. And so we want to try and make a stable coin that is not backed by physical dollars. And so we did a lot of research into, Oracle systems. That's why we built this Oracle pool design. And then we kind of took that and saw how we build a stablecoin protocol. And I don't want to get too much into the details because it's fairly complicated. Mm-hmm. And we have good technical documentation out there that people can read into if they really want to learn more. But I think the main thing that I want to emphasize with this stablecoin and also this Oracle design is that it works fairly differently from Ethereum. So when people imagine this kind of Oracle system or stablecoin system, they often imagine an Ethereum type system. And Ethereum uses something called the accounting system, whereas Cardano uses something called the UTXO system. Now, again, I think there's probably a lot of people watching this podcast who are not super technical, and so they may not know the difference between these two systems. But to kind of keep it short, the UTXO system is different enough that you have to kind of redesign a lot of these systems. You can't just, copy paste over. You have to really think about how would you build an Oracle on the system? How would you build a stablecoin on the system? And there's a lot of trade-offs, some downsides, some benefits you get from the UTXO system. And that's why Cardano wanted to have multiple different sidechains that have different virtual machines on them. So obviously Plutus, which is Cardano's smart contract programming language, will run on the mainnet. But HK, wants to have sidechains that run the Ethereum virtual machine, do something like the KVM. That way, people who want to just for their contract, copy paste, they'll have a kind of an avenue for that on the sidechain. But for the Cardano mainnet that uses this UTXO based system, this is kind of a different way to think about it. And if you don't want to get into the technicalities, but you want to see what kind of impact does it actually have on users, you just have to look at the new multi-asset functionality that was added to Cardano. So on Cardano right now, you can have multiple assets, right? Anybody can create their own asset, you can send assets and so on. You might have noticed as you're creating these assets, or you're sending these assets, there is no ERC20 or this kind of thing that you have to go through. It's all natively supported on the blockchain. And this is something that we can do because Cardano encodes the state of the blockchain into the actual values of the transaction, as opposed to Ethereum, which has kind of like a actual smart contract and has memory allocated the smart contract. And this is something that exists. And everybody, when they send tokens, they have to execute the smart contract, and it costs gas to execute the smart contract. And sometimes you get an error and this whole mess because it's one kind of, I wouldn't say centralized, but one central place where the state of this token is held. And because Cardano doesn't really have that concept in the same way, it means that the experience with the multi-assets is much smoother and much cheaper. And so similarly, because of this different nature, this Oracle system and this stablecoin system works fairly differently than some of the stuff you might have seen in Ethereum. And so if anybody's watching this wants to learn more, so obviously I'm skipping a lot of the technical details. As I mentioned, we have a lot of technical documentation on this topic they're more than welcome to go look into.
Yeah, and I think you guys should, especially if you're interested in it. They have charts. Yeah, they have charts that kind of displays how it works from the user side. What you send to and what you get out of it. It's really cool.
Yeah, and one of our members of Emurgo called Robert Kornacki has been on podcasts before and has videos on this topic. So if you want to go into kind of deep dives, you can find this kind of content on YouTube also, if you prefer watching a video instead of reading documentation.
Awesome. So are you guys going to be working on any DeFi projects in the future? Because you're experimenting with Ergo right now, so there's got to be some DeFi experimentation over there as well, right?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this was kind of our start. So we wanted to do the stablecoin first because, as you know, so much of DeFi relies on a stablecoin. And so we thought that building an Oracle is kind of a prerequisite for the stablecoin. So we did that first. And then the stablecoin was our next step. And now we're starting to work on kind of our next project. And so we haven't announced anything publicly, but we're definitely working on this. And we have a team of people working on this DeFi experience, not just for Cardano, but just for UTXO-based blockchains in general.
Awesome. So what about NFTs? So what is an NFT for people that who don't really have a good understanding? They've just heard the term over and over again.
Yeah, so an NFT is trying to get a asset that's backed by something that oftentimes is a piece of art or the rights to something, and they want each token to represent this kind of concept as opposed to a monetary asset, right? So if you think about ADA, what is ADA representing? It's representing, the ADA token on the blockchain, and you can have, 5 ADA, 6 ADA, 7 ADA, every ADA is the same. With an NFT, you can have, a token representing this painting, a different token representing a different painting, and each token is separate from the other. That's what it means to be non-fungible. And so people are really excited about this possibility because, as you know, people really like collecting stuff and feeling a sense of ownership of something. And people want to have, for example, the first token ever launched on Cardano. Uh, and that's a thing that exists because we released this functionality last week, or this week rather, sometime. I lose track of the date sometimes. So
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
But so when we launched the multi-asset functionality in Cardano, somebody created the first asset. And some people on Twitter started posting like, "Oh man, somebody created the first asset on Cardano. Like, can you send some of this to me?" And people want this not just because it has some inherent financial value for some blockchain. People want this because they want the experience of holding on to something. People to say like, "Oh, I owned one of the first tokens minted on Cardano," and people do this in real life also with trading cards, with paintings. So you could easily build.
This is a bit more technical,
painting.
but my curiosity is getting the best of me. How do you actually, let's say it's a piece of art and it's a digital art, how at the protocol level do you connect this token with this artwork? Do you do it in the metadata, or do you just essentially say this policy ID is what's connected to this artwork? How do you at the protocol level connect these two? Or is it more of a GUI with, say, a dApp website where I connect my Yoroi wallet, it sees that I have this token with this policy ID, and then that website knows that that policy ID is this artwork? How does that work?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways to do it. So the most standard way is that there's no direct connection, and the connection comes from the artist, in a sense. The artist says, whoever owns this token has ownership of this artwork. And there may be license agreements with this. So for example, if you purchase the token for this artwork, you may get rights from the artist to use this artwork for commercial purposes and so on. And so that may be a way to prove ownership, not just from a token ownership perspective, but also from a legal perspective. There is definitely projects that try to have a more direct connection. For example, blockchain-based games do this. So you'll see some blockchain-based games where they have trading cards within the game. And if you go to this dApp to play the game, it'll check your wallet state, look at which cards you have, and populate the game based off these stats. In which case, the asset really does represent the asset in the game. Other people try different stuff. For example, CryptoKitties was popular a few years ago, and the way CryptoKitties did it is that based off the asset you have, the cat image you receive was automatically generated. So they had a mathematical function that takes the token ID you have and turns it into a picture. Okay, and so in a sense, you can't have somebody just create the picture and then say, "Oh, I'm just telling you this asset represents this picture."
That's so smart.
Because
that's why CryptoKitties is killing it.
The picture is generated from the ID. And so these are a few different ways that people have experimented, and I'm sure people have come up with more interesting ways. And people are trying to come up with ways to give liquidity to these assets. So, for example, people are trying to come up with auctions. How do you auction off NFTs for people who want to purchase some of these, or people who want to sell some of these? Obviously, some games have built-in ways to get these. And so people have been experimenting in this space for quite a while now. NFTs are not a new thing, but they've kind of jumped in popularity recently. Because as you know, for any new technology, people come up with an idea and then it kind of blows up, but the technology isn't there yet. And so it kind of falls off in popularity. But then people remember the boom and they start building like, okay, well, we had this problem, we had this problem, we had this problem. They start building towards fixing it. And then you see a boom a few years down the line. And this always happens with crypto. Every bull cycle, the big projects you see come out, they always started the last cycle. And so NFTs is the same thing. So it's booming now because people have been working in the background for quite a long time, experimenting with different things, different technologies, and we're kind of seeing that come out now.
Yeah, it's funny because this space has grown so much that we're going to have different booms at different times. You have a DeFi boom, and then NFTs come. You have an NFT boom, and then you have a third generation crypto boom. You know what I mean? It's funny that these can kind of, even though we're in a bull market, so they're kind of happening around the same time, but you kind of just see the ups and downs from them. It's pretty cool. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the next hard fork. and then kind of tie that back into this hard fork. Because so the Mary hard fork added, as you said earlier, multiple tokens on the Cardano blockchain. And essentially what you can do is you can receive other tokens in your Yoroi wallet or your dApps wallet, and then you have the native token ADA. I mean, they're all native tokens, but the way the wallet displays them is essentially as if they were separate. So what functionality is the next hard fork going to add to the tokens that we already have now? And then also I wanted to touch a little bit on the smart contracts for people that don't really see that's the use and utility for Cardano. That's kind of the final step.
Yeah, so the thing right now is that you can create tokens and you could send tokens to people, but you cannot attach conditions to these tokens. Like you can't say like, oh, you can only send this token if this happened and this happened and this happened. Or you can't say like, oh, if I receive this token, execute this script. So that's the thing that the next hard fork adds. The next hard fork is called Alonzo, and that's the one that adds PLUTO support, which is the smart contract programming language for Cardano. And the reason I mentioned this multi-assets functionality as an example of the UTXO-based system and what kind of Cardano's different smart contract programming language provides is because the reason we had to have these kinds of built-in tokens into the protocol itself is because they tie very much directly into how smart contracts work on Cardano. And so what that means is that whenever you send tokens on Cardano, you'll be able to use these with smart contracts, and you'll be able to say like, okay, if a smart contract receives this token, then do X and do Y and start computing stuff. And that's kind of where all the exciting possibilities come in. And so until we have that, we're kind of limited in the use case we have for tokens. So obviously people can create tokens for fun. They can create tokens that back some sort of centralized assets. So I can say like, okay, this token represents some USD I have in my bank account. But we can't do like an algorithmic stablecoin yet because we can't have systems automatically update based off the sending and receiving of tokens and so on. So there's some exciting stuff we can do. NFTs is one that you can already do now. But building some sort of decentralized auction system where people can upload their NFTs and it starts an auction and people bid on the blockchain, that's something we can't do yet because we don't have the ability to send ADA to increase some auction to automatically send a token to somebody, right? So whenever you think like somebody sending a token or ADA to trigger an action, that's not possible in a decentralized way until we get the smart contract support. But everything else is possible now.
So could someone theoretically mint the tokens now and then add the functionality to said tokens later?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so that's why we wanted to have these tokens released as a part of Goguen. So people who've been around might remember this term Goguen, and Goguen was kind of the era term for smart contracts in Cardano. And we ended up splitting Goguen into three parts: Allegra, Mary, and Alonzo. So Alonzo is the next one that has full PLUTO support. And the reason that we call this splitting and we call Mary a part of Goguen is because this token system is not some temporary solution until you get smart contracts. This is very much core to the way smart contracts will work in Cardano. And there will not be like some native tokens now and then native tokens V2 in the future with different functionality. It'll be a continuation of this system.
And it'll be the same thing with really all of the eras you have. Shelley released with not as much functionality as we'd like, and it's an ongoing building thing, and it's the same way with Goguen, and I assume it'll probably be the same way with Basho. So what's next after Alonzo? What do you guys have the next hard fork planned after that? Maybe a few months out. Now that we're done with the Goguen era. Yeah.
So obviously once you have a smart contract functionality, you're never done updating it. Yeah. So even if you look at Ethereum, who has had a smart contract functionality for quite a long time now, they're still updating the EVM, they're still updating Solidity, adding more functionality and so on. And it's been years down the road. Part of that is due to bad planning on their part, but part of that is also because requirements change over time. People think they need something, and then people are like, oh wait, if you do this kind of thing, you can have this kind of DeFi smart contract. Oh, but this requires some extra functionality? Can we add this functionality to make developers' life easier? And so I'm sure, Plutus will keep evolving over time, especially because even the core cryptography evolves. For example, stuff like, zero knowledge proofs, the technology for it keeps improving over time. But every time somebody comes up with a new system to implement that efficiently within the blockchain, you need to have these, new building blocks. You need to somehow connect that to the smart contract. And so there'll be updates over time. But beyond the smart contract protocol, we still have two main things we want to do with Cardano. One of them is the treasury system. The other one's the voting system on the protocol parameters. Okay, so obviously there's a voting system for how do we spend the treasury funds, and there's a voting system for how do we change the protocol parameters. And these are two things that we're working on, we're looking into. And so obviously the voting system for the treasury is ongoing. This is something that AgeUSD is doing in parallel, and that's why you have Catalyst and the ability to register, and you have the ability for people to receive funding already through the treasury. But this voting for protocol parameters hasn't happened yet. And so, for example, the transaction fee on Cardano right now is based on a math function. It's AX plus B, just a linear function based on the number of bytes using a transaction. But the terms in that equation, the A and the B, is up to a protocol parameter. So anybody could propose a change, and then people could go vote whether or not they agree on this change. And we need this for the blockchain to basically be updatable, right? That's the end goal of Cardano, to have an updatable system. Because once we have an updatable system, we won't have these kind of contentious hard forks that just destroy, the Bitcoin community and cause it to split into all these weird directions. To avoid this, we want to have an updatable system. People can voice their opinions of what they think should be the best system. At the end of the day, there's somebody who has their opinion go through, and that becomes, the official opinion of the blockchain. And so AgeUSD is working hard on this, and that's kind of the main thing that we want to have to kind of wrap up the project, because in a sense, once you have the updatable system and you have a treasury system, then you really achieve sustainability. Because if you want to do anything else in the future, it's no longer one company saying this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to do it. Now, whenever a company wants to propose change, it doesn't have to be AgeUSD anymore. It can be any company, including AgeUSD. Can say like, I want to build this functionality. Here's my treasury proposal for it. Here's my update proposal for it. And it all becomes automatic. So not only will we have, this merry process where the merry hard fork was so smooth from an engineering perspective, we'll also have this smooth process from a kind of social perspective where it'll be easy for people to come in and new companies to come in and people to come in and propose stuff, get the funding, get the voting system to propose the actual change to the blockchain itself and get that approved.
That's kind of
the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of in a simple way, that's kind of the mic drop moment for Cardano. You just have this system that can be upgraded by a decentralized governance,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's
so
pretty
there's some of the stuff AgeUSD is working on, like, we want to have state channels and we want to upgrade Ouroboros. As you know, there's other versions of Ouroboros that aren't implemented yet. So there's versions of Ouroboros that add privacy to delegations. There's version of Ouroboros to recover from spikes and with honest majority. And there's all this research that AgeUSD has done and continues to do that we haven't implemented yet.
I didn't know about the one that actually added privacy to staking addresses. That's always been a big issue of mine is, when it just completely removes the functionality of having different addresses. Because when you stake to somewhere, you can just view their staking address and see all the addresses that they have on the account, so in a way it's even less private than Bitcoin, by having different addresses.
And AgeUSD published a paper on this topic quite a while back, like a year and a half ago, something like that. But the thing about the privacy implementation of Ouroboros is that it's a fairly core change to the image of Cardano. So obviously, public blockchains are viewed very differently if they have privacy features by the people using them, by the regulatory bodies, and so on. And so obviously, a lot of people want privacy because privacy is kind of a human right, and people have the right to maintain their privacy. But at the same time, it should not be up to AgeUSD to impose this change on the community. And so this is a kind of upgrade to the protocol that could only really be done morally through an update proposal that the community votes on, because it's a fairly big fundamental change to how the blockchain both operates and how it'll be seen by external bodies.
Yeah. So another big change that I think needs to happen. I'm curious on your opinion about this because you have a deeper understanding of a lot of this. The A-Not parameter, and its function with pledge to incentivize stake pools to pledge more to their stake pool, right? What do you think about that, and what change do you think needs to happen for us to really have the K increases matter, and then people actually have an incentive to pledge to their pool, even at the lower levels, and then at the upper levels, like exchanges,
Yeah, so the way that I'd like this kind of discussion to evolve is through the Cardano improvement proposal process. So we've had some members of the community come to the SIPs, Cardano improvement proposal SIPs, and kind of write down their ideas and concrete thoughts. And IHK researchers have read through these and written responses and have discussion on this topic. Now, obviously, Cardano was originally a research project, and so it takes a bit of time for the researchers to get used to it now being a public-facing project, and so they respond to all these SIP proposals, but maybe not as fast as every community member would want. And this is a transition, and everyone will get used to it. But so I just want to get that out of the door before we get too much into this conversation. So I'm sure a lot of people watching this podcast will have very strong opinions on this topic, and that's like I've been saying for months we should do this thing.
Yeah, so it's either they have strong opinions or they're wondering what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah, and so I just want to preface this ahead of time by saying if you have a strong opinion, you're more than welcome to go create a proposal and see what kind of feedback you get from the researchers, because they've thought a lot about this topic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I will do a quick little explanation for people that don't know what we're talking about. So the A-Not parameter is what incentivizes people to pledge to a stake pool, right? So when you go and look, you choose your stake pool. Some people have 100 ADA pledged, and some people have 1 million ADA pledged. And just because someone has 1 million ADA pledged doesn't mean they're better than someone else. But at the same time, you have to have this A-Not parameter to incentivize people to not make, say, 50 pools, right? And then use whether it's their own ADA, or I guess if it's their own ADA, they can do that, but essentially use their marketing to conglomerate a 51% attack, right? And then the K parameter is kind of the ideal stake in each pool. So essentially what you do is you take the total supply, divide it by the K parameter, and then you get the max amount of ADA that you're supposed to have in a stake pool. Right, and so currently A-Not's set at 0.30, and what that essentially means is if you pledge the full 63.5 million, you're going to get a 30% increase in rewards versus if you pledge 0, right? The issue is this curve is linear, right? So if you're pledging, which for most people, 1 million ADA is over $1 million now, a large amount of money. When you pledge that, you don't get a large rewards increase, right? So what this makes people do is just make more pools and pledge 1,000 ADA or 10,000 ADA or 100,000, because there's no real incentive for pledge because it's that linear curve. And then now we can get into it, because I feel like that's a good intro.
So if I were to take the experience we've had of launching this on both the testnet and now on mainnet and think about what I would have done differently personally, I would have probably increased the influence of the pledge a bit more. I think the influence right now is too low. I want to be careful to not say increase the A-Not, because obviously these parameters don't affect just one thing. The format is a bit more complicated than that, as people will know. So speaking in slightly broader terms, I would made the pledge be a bit more impactful, and I would probably lower the minimum fee a bit also.
Yeah.
The two things I want to change in the rationale is, one is that I want to increase the pledge because obviously we've noticed that the pledge is not impactful enough for people to really bother. It's barely worth the time for people to actually put the pledge up for their pool, especially if you don't want to risk having the ADA attacked in some way and you don't have a hardware wallet. People will just go okay, I'll just pledge 0 because it's not impactful enough, and I'd rather keep my ADA safe in a hard wallet.
Yeah, and also, I mean,
Um,
now that ADA's worth so much, um,
yeah,
I mean, it could even be used as ransom. You know what I mean? Someone could just snatch you up. You know what I mean? If you have so
yeah,
much pledged to your pool. So, I mean, it's a risky thing, and in the current state, the reward does not outweigh the risk, you know, but
yeah,
it's
exactly.
but it's very, very important for at the protocol level for us to have this incentive for people to pledge to their pools, you know, to protect against Sybil attacks. And I agree with you completely about the minimum cost per epoch. You know, 6 months ago, you know, we talked about small pools a lot, and I just kept mentioning this. I'm like, so I mean, if you look at a small pool with 500,000 ADA, I mean, at 500,000 ADA, that minimum cost per epoch is eating like 90%
Yeah.
of the
Oh yeah.
rewards, just like a nuts amount,
Yeah.
right? So then if you look at the time, a pool that had 180 million, that fee was like 0.3%, something small. And then for a pool at 500,000, it was 90%. For a pool at like 1 million, it was like 20%, just like a large amount. So I agree with that too. And now that the price of ADA is so high, you know, I think that's something that should probably be looked at immediately because, you know, for most people, the servers and the infrastructure they're running in tune with the min fee, or not the min fee, the margin is, you know, you don't need 340 every 5 days to pay your bills, you know, because in USD, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a large amount of money.
Yeah. And so the reason I want to mention the mint fee is because the pledge is important from a philosophical perspective. Um, that this is not blocking anybody from getting in to the ecosystem. It just causing people to be kind of over engaged in a sense. But this minimum fee is actually blocking a lot of people. Like I see pools that have, 5 million ADA pledge, and they come to us and message us like the Yoroi support, and it's like, hey, my pool's ranking is really bad. Like, what do I do? And I have to explain to them like the minimum fee is just eating away at any rewards that people who delegate to you would earn. And unfortunately, that means your ROA is just lower than other pools. Obviously, if more people delegated to your pool, the percentage would decrease, and then the ROA would go up. But for a lot of people just getting started, getting those initial few delegations to get you over that point, it's really hard because there's so many pools now and there's so much competition that a lot of people just can't make it over that bar. And so I see it kind of a bigger problem because it's blocking people who may run successful pools from really getting involved. And I think with the rise in price in ADA, this minimum fee is more than it needs to be.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree, and that's another thing I worry about with pledge. You know, I mean, when you actually add incentive with pledge and with how expensive ADA is. I mean, I on my Twitter, someone was talking about them putting a large portion of their minimum wage job into ADA, and it took me back to when I was 2017, and I was making 8.25 an hour, and I was putting almost all of that into ADA at the time because I was just so happy about all this. And someone replied and said, because to me in the United States, 8.25, I mean, you can't live off that. You can't, you can barely even feed yourself good food off of that. And someone replies and says, that's a day's wage in the Philippines. And just really put things in perspective for me, because if that's a day's wage in the Philippines, then, for people in the United States, I mean, even for people in the United States, 10K ADA pledge at this point is a large sum of money to have in a decentralized protocol for the average wage, So if we look at this from the Philippines perspective, well, maybe 1,000 ADA is a large amount for them, a huge portion of skin in the game. So, I mean, it's really tricky stuff, because at the core of Cardano, we've always just wanted to have everyone be able to participate, so it's like,
Yeah.
and that's why this is such a tricky topic, especially as the value of ADA is increased, and it's a hard thing, because I suspect that when the ANOP incentive does change, I've kind of always looked at the S curve, where you kind of incentivize people right here, you go down, and then you incentivize the exchange at the top, so the rewards don't just go to all of the exchanges as it would if you increased it now. Because essentially the way it works now is if you increase ANOP to say 0.5, it lowers the rewards for everyone like us, the normal stake pool operators, and gives more and more to the people that pledge the max amount. So exchanges, companies that have a large portion of ADA. So in the current function, it's just not going to work, right? you have to completely change the function. But at the same time, even with the S curve, the way that I've looked at it, the S curve often is going to stop, I would say probably in the 700,000 to the 5 million range is where that's going to peak, depending on how you spike the curve. And for most people, I mean, not for most people, for 99%, having a 1,700,000 pledge to 5 million pledges is impossible, right? So then essentially you're making stake pool operation not really a marketing tactic anymore. It's a bit of marketing and also having the funds. So really the stake pool operation game as a whole will change, when this A0 perspective or A0 parameter does change, so I'm very interested to see where this goes.
Yeah. And one thing that I think is important to mention is that one of the innovations of Ouroboros as a protocol, and people know Ouroboros is the proof of stake algorithm that IHK both researched and developed. So one of the innovations of Ouroboros is that anybody has a chance to make a block. So you can register a stake pool with 100 ADA, and you'll have a chance to make a block. The chance will be really, really low. So obviously 100 ADA is not much in the grand scheme of things, but you have a chance, right? And this is different from other proof of stake protocols where there's a fixed number of people, and those are the people that make blocks, and everybody else has a 0% chance. In Cardano, everybody has a chance if they want to take it. Now, that being said, although everybody has a chance, the number of people that can have a non-trivial chance is fairly limited. And so that's what the K parameter is meant to decide. It's meant to say, okay, well, at an optimal stage, how many people we want to have that have a reasonable chance to create blocks. And there's a limit to how high that can go, right? Because we can't have, million stake pools all creating blocks at regular intervals because of just the limit of the speed of light and distributed systems and so on. And so that's why K is currently set to, you probably know the number better than me. I think it's 500 still.
Yeah.
So 500, obviously it's a lot when it comes to blockchains. When it comes to the number of people on the planet, this is obviously a very small number. So I understand that people would want to, in a sense, increase it to get more people and have people who obviously live in countries that don't have as high of an income be able to create successful stake pools. But unfortunately, that's easier said than done. And so the goal of Cardano can't be to have everybody, regardless of income, be able to create blocks, because that's just not possible in distributed systems. The best thing we can do is say that anybody can participate in the system, and if you want to take a chance, you have a non-trivial chance. You have a chance to make a block, but just not at the same profitability as people who have more stake in the system.
Yeah. See, and I agree with you completely. The issue was just the marketing of the stake pools on Cardano. It was, hey, you guys can set this up on a Rock Pi. You guys will eventually be able to set this up on much lower systems, and everyone can run a stake pool. So I think that's kind of where that ideology comes from. Everyone should be able to run a pool. Everyone should be able to mint blocks, but everyone can, like probability wise, especially with the current parameters. If I start up a pool, I put 100,000 ADA in there, and over time I'm going to make the same amount, other than the server costs that I have to pay, than as everyone else, right? The issue is when we do change this A0 parameter, the only pools that people are going to want to delegate to are going to be the pools in the sweet spot. I mean, because if you're looking at these pools in the sweet spot that are paying 6 to 7% versus the pool you set up at your house with 100 ADA pledge, it's going to give you, say, like 3%. That's what it really just takes the anyone can set up a pool completely out of it. It completely changes everything. You know what I mean? So it's so I think the issue was in the way that it was advertised, but I understand where you're coming from, and I see that truly what matters is a decentralized system that has the power to be the world's next financial system, and not everyone being able to run a pool, right? Because there are going to be a lot more jobs for people from Cardano, right, or from blockchains in general, right? So it doesn't. especially with, I always think about this with Project Catalyst, you know, like every time I participate in the Project Catalyst community, the town halls, and we talk about all this stuff. I mean, like 19 different job titles pop up in my head, you know, when it comes to the decentralized governance stuff. So it's pretty cool. But the last question I wanted to ask you is, where do you see Cardano in 5 years?
5 years is a long time.
It is a long time, and Cardano and blockchain moves fast. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, part of that is trying to come up with, Cardano 2025. So as you know, when Cardano was originally envisioned, we had a 2020 plan, which is what we do up to 2020. And at that time, that was a 5-year plan. And, now we're at the end of that. We have to come up with another 5-year plan in a sense. The difficulty in this is that obviously Cardano is no longer just AgeUSD, Emurgo, and CF. There's not many companies involved. And so we can't unilaterally set a plan. And so the best we can do is try and figure out, what kind of expertise can our companies bring to the table, and what can we do within that scope, and how do we get more companies involved in the construction of a plan and the actual implementation of a plan. Because obviously people want a plan, right? Nobody wants a blockchain with no clear goal. Even, Bitcoin, which is meant to be the blockchain that doesn't change in a sense, they have, multi-year plans of, this new types of cryptography they're looking into, and different Bitcoin improvement proposals that, have often multi-year spans. And people want to the blockchain to somehow evolve and improve. And so, say we would like to propose certain sets of plans for Cardano within the scope of what we can do at Emurgo and Cardano Foundation and AgeUSD. But I don't want to talk about it too much because there will be kind of more official announcements coming after this. And so it's hard for me to know what I can say and what I can't say. But I think probably Charles has talked more about this.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to get information out of him. Trust me.
Yeah, and also he's obviously higher up than I am in a sense, and so he has the ability to reveal something, and then that by default means that it's okay to talk about it. I do not have
so instead of looking at it from like an engineering perspective and like where do you see it generally, right? Not in terms of price, but just in terms of like social impact and where it's at in the world, like.
Yeah, so the main thing that I've always cared about is the finance aspect. So obviously people have, huge passions for stuff like NFTs that we talked about earlier in this podcast. But I've always been more interested in kind of the financial side. And mostly what I want is to have an alternative to the banking system. The banking system is just, so I was born in Canada, and we have like okay banks. They're not great. They're not bad. They're okay. And then, I went to the US and they had a better banking system than Canada, but it still had, all these weird complications and so on. And then I come to Japan where I live now, and it's just the taxes, the fees, the service, it's all just, you would be shocked. You'd be shocked. And, I can navigate through these systems because, I work as an engineer. And so I, make enough money to, pay off credit cards and to have the banks actually interested in having me as a customer and so on. But as you said, there's a lot of people, not even just in third world countries, but even in the United States who work, minimum wage jobs and who have trouble, dealing with all these banking fees, and they have trouble getting loans, they have trouble, getting all this stuff from the banks.
Yeah, to a point where they're ousted from the system. I've actually met people that, have because they work a low wage job, maybe because they had a kid too young, hurt themselves in an accident at work, and then their work not pay for it, and then them have $50,000 to $100,000 in debt, and because they can never pay that off, they essentially have to remove themselves from the system for 7 years until that falls off the record. So then you can't use a bank account.
And so I have a certain privilege to have the money and the time to go through all the bullshit that the banks and the financial system throws at me, but not everybody has that privilege.
Yeah.
And also, we're never going to get rid of the banks, because banks do offer a service, beyond just storing your money, and offering services like loans and protecting somebody's assets and this kind of stuff will never go away. And so my goal is not to kill the banks, but I would like an alternative financial system where this is not your only option. You have the choice of the banks, you have the choice of other stuff, and that's really what I would like, Cardano to be. And to get to that position, it doesn't mean just investing in DeFi, but obviously the whole social aspect to it. Because we need the DAOs to do the lending and all these kinds of systems to also exist on Cardano. And if in 5 year time we have a total alternative system where countries or individuals can choose which system they want to opt into, I think we've done a really good job.
I agree completely, man. And I mean, at the core, if this happens, if we have this, or when it happens, I should say, when we have this alternative financial system, the banks are going to have to be more competitive, and that gets rid of a lot of the bureaucracy and the annoyances when people actually do have an alternative option, and all they have to do is really be more competent, learn how to secure their finances. But at the same time, because this has been ingrained in our society, there's a lot of people that are not going to want to hold their own funds. They're going to want to go to banks. But now, even though it's not FDIC insured, but now we are seeing kind of the start of these centralized banking services, like Celsius, Nexo, BlockFi. And although they worry me in terms of security, I think that that's really going to change the banking system as a whole. And then that's the start of it, centralized, ways to hold your money versus banks. And then we're going to also have the decentralized part of it too on top of Cardano, which is awesome. But we'll go ahead and end it there. I really appreciate you coming on today, Sebastien. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's always great to have these kinds of discussions and to talk to the community about all the stuff we're working on in Emurgo. So I hope people heard some interesting stuff. And now that you've listened to the full podcast, you're now ready to furiously Google all this information and learn more and get more involved.
Awesome. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching it. If you made it till the end, type in the Cardano Aura number 14. Also, if you guys have any questions about anything we went over today, just feel free to comment down below. I also have a Discord server. I'm trying to build up an army of educated Cardano people to answer your questions, and I'm there all the time answering questions as well. So please feel free, come to the Discord server and get educated. But I hope you guys all have a good rest of your weekend. But thank you guys so much for coming.